Take
Thank
it
you.
away.
Thank you, Sivia. Thanks for everybody for joining us today for another Fugue Lunch and Learn. So Fugue is cloud security for developers by developers. And really what we mean by that is, in the era of cloud, developers are designing, coding, deploying, and managing their cloud environments. And that means they own their environments and they should own the security of their environments. And we want to help them do that really well, really effectively, without a lot of frustration and delays. And with Fugue, you have a unified policy engine, our approach to policy as code. So developers are using the same policy framework for checking their infrastructure as code or their dev environments. And security teams are using that same policy as code framework, same policies to keep an eye on everything that they've got running in their runtime environment, their running infrastructure, know everything that they've got operating and the configuration state of all of that. So we make that really easy. And that helps you, comply with all the compliance requirements that you have, report to your executive teams, your auditors, as well as identify misconfiguration risks and kind of the architectural vulnerabilities that we're seeing being exploited every day in today's cloud breaches. So today specifically, we're going to get into managing custom cloud security policies as things beyond the out-of-the-box compliance rules that you get with Fugue. And I think we've got Ricardo here. I think most of our customers have some additional kind of custom policies that they need to comply with. And so that's where we're going to focus today. Hey, Ricardo, how are you doing?
I'm great. How are you?
I'm doing well. Thank you. So what are we going to get into today?
Outside of it being warm here, which is nice for a change, somebody put in the chat there from Boca Raton, so I was a little bit jealous. But
it's been a cold winter up
yeah,
here.
We're 70 today. So agenda-wise, we'll go over just kind of a brief overview of Fugue. We'll also talk about the custom rule capabilities. Customers will always ask, why we need custom rules. So we'll talk through that. We'll go through kind of the basics of what is a custom rule. Again, why, when to use the custom rules, how do you implement those? We'll talk through a couple of the different approaches and then start thinking about, automating. So how do we kind of develop a pipeline or a practice around that? We'll talk through those different approaches as well, but we'll show some things, but it's really to get customers thinking about, getting outside of what these standard security policies and regimes are from the frameworks and really enforcing it at your level. So for the specific checks that you want to check as an organization. So we'll touch on that as well.
Awesome. And want to remind everybody, we love to keep these interactive. So if you have any kind of thoughts or questions concerning, what Ricardo's showing here, questions about Fugue, and your specific use cases and the challenges that you're trying to solve, please do by all means pop those in the chat at any time. I will try to interrupt Ricardo at opportune times to present those. And if you want to remain anonymous, you are free to use that Q&A feature to pose any questions. But otherwise, please do keep those in the chat so we can keep this interactive. So thank you, everybody, again for joining. And Ricardo, why don't we take it away?
Yeah, so first, let's talk a little bit about the platform, just kind of how Fugue is positioned, where we are helping developers and enterprises just through the SDLC. So this graphic really shows what the infrastructure as code is on the left side. So whether you're using Terraform, whether you're using CloudFormation, and I think this actually speaks to the question that was posted in the chat. So we talk about shifting left. The question specifically, so I'll read it out and actually apply it to this slide. But with the adoption of shift left approach and continuous deployment, hard-coded secrets embedded in source code and scattered through DevOps pipelines pose a significant risk. How better security policies and management, how can Fugue help that with improving secrets governance in the cloud? So really good question. And you know, the one side of that is actually starting early. So when you are examining the source code, when you're looking at those Terraform files or cloud formation templates, where you have a reference to a secret, obviously you can write a rule to make sure that it does not appear in plain text. You can write a rule specifying that it should look at a vault if you're using it, or AWS secrets. There should be some reference in there. Or I think, I'm not sure what HashiCorp calls theirs. I think it might be a vault as well. But you can write those sorts of rules to ensure that that is it's flagged as a critical violation and that you're stopping that pre-deployment. So before it even gets to cloud, going even a step further, you can perform many of these checks in a pre-commit sort of fashion as well. So before your developer even attempts to commit that code using a pre-commit hook, you can stop that. That can be a violation, and so that code wouldn't even be committed to the Git repository. And so that's where it starts. So looking at the infrastructure as code, examining that before you move into the cloud environments. Where many customers come to us, they're already in the cloud. So we have customers that come to us with hundreds of accounts in the cloud and are now saying, what do we have there? How do we get that into a state of compliance? And custom rules can help with that as well. So it's really that process. We obviously want customers to start as early as possible, just because of the evolution of cloud environments and the fact that people have kind of moved their workloads to the cloud and then thought about kind of the security and compliance after the fact. You really have to touch on them on both sides. Drew, you want to go to the next slide? So, you know, when we get deeper into it, we really talk about the nuts and bolts of the software development lifecycle. So really being able to impact the developer, giving the developer tools, giving the DevSecOps teams tools that they can write custom rules that are going to manage good security practices within the organization, and also give that the necessary feedback so that the developers know the mistakes that they're making. And so that's one of the things we'll talk about. And even with Fugue, when we talk about custom messaging, it is always, you know, to be able to give that developer feedback. The next stage of that is the deployment. So whatever tool you're using, being able to execute these checks within the deployment pipeline. So you can actually have a gate at the, you know, before the code is committed. You can check the code once it is committed for any violations. And then once you get into the deployment stage, you can make a determination there based on the severity level settings. If a certain severity level violation is present, you will stop the build. So you essentially could have a Circle CI or a Jenkins or a code build, code pipeline tool to exit that specific stage with a 1. So it will stop the build. Whatever the output is saved as an artifact. It goes back to whoever sent it. And those sorts of misconfiguration issues are presented to the person who submitted or who merged that code into the pipeline itself. And then when you look at the runtime, there are issues that I'll say that we don't even know about. So vulnerabilities, that's a practice of those who are attempting to get into misconfigured resources. You know, there could be a vulnerability discovered in a specific port configuration. You know, a different application or an application that's becoming popular has some exploits that we're not aware of, and all of our security groups permit traffic, ingress and egress for that specific resource. So that's the reason why we need those. As much as companies like ourselves endeavor to be ahead of those things, you know, security and protecting environments is continually evolving. And so we need to be able to write those rules to check to see where those vulnerabilities exist in our environments, and so that we can, take action to remediate those things. So it really comes, you look at the bottom 4 check marks, we can impact it at IAC, we can do it pre-commit, and the PR checks. We can look at it at different stages in our pipeline. So pre-deployment checks directly in the CI, with the CI making the decision based on the output to fail a build or roll it back. And then obviously on the runtime. So whenever we're going to integrate into our cloud environments, we can run those checks on the specific environments, checking for those specific rules, and then we can impact things that way on a continuous basis. Next slide. So let's jump into it. So I'm going to share my screen. I'm going to apologize in advance if one of my many screens comes up that shouldn't. We can all laugh at me.
Sounds dangerous.
So I'm going to actually share a couple of different screens. So I'm going to jump around a little bit, but we're going to start here. So this is in the text editor. So for rules, so just a little bit of foundation of Fugue and the way that we actually interact and create these custom rules. So Fugue is using Open Policy Agent. So this, when we talk about a resource language, is or a language that we are evaluating resources, is Rego. So you will write your rules in Rego. So many, if you come to work with Fugue and Regula, Regula is our open source project for infrastructure as code testing. It actually ties into the Fugue platform. So you do have the ability to check these rules wherever they are. So you can check these in an offline Git repository. You can actually sync these rules with our with the platform, which I'll show you how that works. You could have a CI tool that handles that. So that's when we get into kind of the execution of that, the rules, managing it, and automating that. So first, let me start. The first bullet point up there was, what is a custom rule? So a custom rule for us is essentially any rule that's not built into our system. So it's any rule that a customer creates to evaluate any of the resources that are in the environment. And so these rules don't specifically map to any specific compliance framework. They absolutely can, as this rule does, maps to a specific framework. And we also give you the ability to add any additional metadata. So you can also modify the severity level for a specific rule. You can modify the description, title, any of the messaging. So this is the sort of thing that would come back to your developer. You could also embed messages within your rules for custom rules. So there is a lot that you can do with this. And for this reason, customers will implement it. So again, a custom rule is just a rule that you write to evaluate any resources, and that you just implement it as a custom rule. So that's kind of the basic bullet point. Why and when. So we've kind of covered some of this, but let's think of a couple of examples of why we might do this. So for one, if we look at this EBS volume encryption, I don't know that we've come across a customer that doesn't have EBS volumes unencrypted in their in their environment. So this is kind of common that we see. It's obviously not a great thing, but at some point, people have deployed resources that don't have an encrypted volume. This is something that we would ultimately want to stop in our builds. So when we break down kind of what's represented here, when we develop and write custom rules, this is key. So for Fugue, you have any of the cloud providers, but you also have a repository environment. So with the repository, this declaration here tells us that this rule can be evaluated in our infrastructure as code. So, and we're using in this resource type declaration, we're looking at, this is a Terraform resource type declaration. So this would be in our Terraform infrastructure as code. The only change that you would make to do like CloudFormation, for example, would just be the way that the resource type is declared in a CloudFormation template. You would have that represented there. And here, it's just a very simple statement that we are going to allow if it's represented, if the encryption is represented as true in our infrastructure as code, then it's compliant, false, non-compliant. So this rule is also one that we will use to evaluate all of our running infrastructure. So this is really kind of basic in a sense. When we look at the second example, this is where we start getting into, a modification. This is another why, a modification of a standard rule. So we would say, based on breaches that we've seen and other exploits, that we want to have our all of our S3 buckets need to be, public access needs to be blocked. So we don't want anybody to be able to get to our public or our S3 buckets to look at our objects. But we may have S3 buckets that have public assets in it. We may have S3 buckets that we're using as static websites. And so you may not want to go in if you have hundreds, if not thousands of buckets, for example. You may have 5 that are public and you want to allow them to be public. You have a number of options to manage that. So you could actually manage within the Fugue platform itself to create a waiver for those specific resources. Or you could do something like this, which is create a rule that gives us a public block exception. So I'm not going to teach Rego here. I'm probably not qualified to do that. I know enough. But if we look at this, essentially, this is what we would call an advanced rule. And an advanced rule is you're declaring your resource types within the rule itself. And advanced rules also cover multiple resource types. So this is another good use of custom rules. When you have specific resource relationships that you want to identify and to pull those together to have a sort of singular evaluation of a specific resource. So in this case, we're looking at S3 buckets that have, they have to have the public block access set. So all of these elements of the block public access would be true, but we want to create a list of exceptions. So these buckets here that we have, that we're going to declare that these are valid. So these are going to be part of our exception list. Simply state we're given the names of those buckets. And then we look at, either it has the public block on, or it's in this, this is valid bucket section here. So basically those two attributes would need to be set. Either the name is here or it has the block public access. We'll state that as an overall. And then all we're doing is iterating over this. So we iterate over all the buckets. We look to see if it's in this specific set of valid overall buckets. If it's not, then we deny the resource. We also have the ability to do a deny resource with message. So, and then we can simply put the message here, not in our valid list. So we could do stuff like that. And that's another kind of benefit of being able to do, custom rules. And I'm not going to save that. And then the last one is, every customer, I believe we have, has tagging requirements. So, some customers have tags that they apply to S3 buckets, for example, for data classification. Some customers have naming conventions that they look for. This rule here looks for a specific tag for EC2 instances. So it's basically just saying, it's very straightforward. You need to have an application tag. So we're looking for a specific key, not necessarily looking at the value, but this has to be represented. This is actually just an example of an OR block. You can actually just have it modified to lowercase or uppercase using some of the built-in functions with Rego that if you have a familiarity with Rego, you'd be very familiar with that. And then you would, this is basically just going to say that any instance that we evaluate has to have an application tag. So it's either a lowercase application, or lowercase a, or an uppercase a, and that would be required. So it can be as simple as that. We have customers that have rules that look for, a number of set tags across multiple resource types. So that is something that you might want to do as well. So these are just some small examples of the creation of the custom rules. So now we kind of get into, when we think about managing those custom rules. So, and you have options. One of the options that we, actually, let me pause there. I'll take a quick pause. Drew, are there any questions in the chat? Anything that's come up in the Q&A? I can pause there. Where we're going over the rules here.
One quick question was just the policies that you're talking about, can they be applied to both Terraform and CloudFormation or other infrastructure as code tools?
Yeah, you actually can. So kind of when they're managed within the tool, which I'll show, there's a bit of a conversion that happens when you pull those rules down. And it doesn't matter. So for any of the rules that we have that are kind of in-house rules, for the specific cloud providers, I actually need to confirm that because I think it'll still pull it down. Otherwise, you would just have to declare it. So the resource type as named by CloudFormation or Terraform, we typically just encourage the use of the Terraform type because it's pretty seamless and working. The Fugue tool itself will read whatever the CloudFormation type is, Terraform type, or even what's represented in the AWS, Azure, or Google documentation as well. So it automatically does the conversion. I think it does the backwards conversion as well, but I'll confirm that.
Okay, and we've got from a video, I believe is the pronunciation. Correct me if I'm wrong. A multi-stage question here. One is, what is your WAF or WAP security tools, web application and API protection? I feel that might be a bit of a different area.
Yeah, so is that more for the Fugue platform itself? I may not have an answer for that specifically. If you're looking at some of the rules that we have for WAF specifically, I would say if they are part of CIS benchmarks, they are all open source. So we've open sourced all of our rules for CIS benchmarks. And let's see, you could get to that going, this site here is regular.dev. This links directly to our GitHub repository, and you can go to this Rego section, then the rules, and this would have all of the different resource types. And you'd see this detail here. So this is all of, let's see. So actually, this is a good rule. So this was looking at this was specific to Log4j. So this is a good rule to evaluate. So it's looking at, these representations in the WAF rule, I believe, and that's what it, yeah, that's what the evaluation is. So yeah, I won't go into detail here, but yeah, you can find this. This is github.com/fugue/regula, and then you just go into the Rego section of the rules, and you would see this specific WAF rule. So hopefully that answers the question. If not, we can kind of come back to it.
Okay, and can you hear me?
I can hear you.
Okay, great. Next question was about custom rules for configuring containers of resources, and specifically in regulated or government environments. But maybe if you could just tackle kind of container support, security support in general first.
Yeah, so we will impact kind of what we can see from at the onset. So from a Kubernetes perspective, any of the manifests that you have, we do not currently evaluate Docker files, say like when you're creating your specific Docker files. So we don't do an evaluation of those. I know there are a number of tools, like I know AWS, obviously Azure and Google all have tools built in that will evaluate any image that you push into those repositories. But we don't evaluate those today. And so those rules wouldn't necessarily be set up. We do evaluate, so from a running perspective, so any like pod configurations, any sort of Fargate, trying to think ECS configurations, those would be a part of our runtime checks. And so you could write custom rules against those configurations. So you'd be able to evaluate those. But anything really that you can declare in your Terraform or CloudFormation, you can write a rule against. But I don't know, a lot of that, the actual Docker file configuration is not something that we're inspecting today.
Okay, and then with regard to government environments, Fugue is available in the AWS GovCloud, and we provide full support for NIST 800-53 out of the box. Obviously, you can as Ricardo's showing, create additional custom rules on top of that to address any specific use cases or security requirements that you have. The last question is regarding kind of multi-cloud and specifically Oracle and Juniper. Fugue is available on AWS, Azure, and Google Cloud. We don't currently support Oracle or Juniper or other cloud platforms at this moment. We're always considering things for our roadmap, and would love to hear from you about your specific use case and needs. But nothing to announce at the moment with regard to additional cloud platforms.
Yeah, and in regards to kind of evaluating things, so if you this regular tool that we use, this can be used with outside of the cloud. So it can be downloaded locally. It can be used in a CI system. So you don't have to tie everything back into the Fugue platform. For rules management, you absolutely can. We encourage that, but it doesn't necessarily have to be integrated with the Fugue UI. So just what I just did here. So you do have the ability, and we always talk about tools that are for the developer. So more often than not, you would have somebody that has a development sort of background that would most likely create these rules. So it's a matter of being able to sync these rules. So and you could do it a number of different ways. This is probably the easiest way. So this is just a local sync. So all I did is using the Fugue CLI tool is I just did a sync of all of the rules that were in that specific repository, that folder that we just showed. So this actually, obviously using my API credentials that I set up in the Fugue UI, I'm able to perform a sync. So it essentially will create the rule. If it's not there, it'll update the rule. If the rule is existing, so if I modify this rule, for example, and I add to that list of buckets, we will see that that list of buckets was modified, and then I could perform an update of that rule. Now, when we shift into the, let me refresh this, the platform itself, we can filter it by our custom rules. And see the rules that we just created. So this block public access rule that we created, all of this is coming directly from that specific folder. These rules are uploaded. In terms of executing this, and this would be part of kind of that deployment pipeline. So anytime that you modify your rules, you can set the rules up within a pipeline, regardless of the pipeline you're using. It would just simply be a stage that could pull the rules from your Git repository. So you could just tie it into a repository where you have your rules managed. You would run a sync of those rules. When you have your specific environments, you would just want to make sure that that the checks, that the compliance evaluations that are being performed, that you have the custom rules checked. Here is where you would see all of the rules for the different compliance frameworks. We're focused on the custom rules. Once we have that checked, we can then run scans for that environment. So, and this is all part of that automation. So when we start talking about, actually the management and automating that process, this is something that you would automate. So through the API, I could actually trigger any scans here as well. So, if we're scripting this entire thing, I could simply say, Fugue scan, and I think I can just plug the environment in there. and we just started a new scan. So when you think about just the automation process, if you were to actually do this within a pipeline, you would want to sync the rules. Once the rules are synced, and you usually wait for everything to complete and execute, you just follow that up with scanning either a single environment or multiple environments, and then you can get produced output. So if we did a wait on this and waited for it to complete, and then we could get an output of that most recent scan. In the interest of time, we'll just kind of flip over here and see when these scans complete, and then we can see exactly what's being evaluated. And again, I stress that this could be done on our infrastructure as code files as well. So because we added the metadata of that repository environment, and I made the declaration of using that Terraform naming convention, instantly we can evaluate all of our Terraform environments. And again, we're using that same code. So there's no different, no additional modifications that are needed. And like we, kind of stated earlier, it is that unified policy engine. So just writing it once, we can manage everything within this platform, and then be able to execute that. And we'll just wait for these scans to complete. It usually takes a few minutes. And then we can look at the evaluations. But this is really all I had to cover from a management perspective. We appreciate everyone always taking the time out of lunch to kind of learn. This is always an opportunity to share, for me at least, to share what some of our customers are doing, what they're able to do with the platform, whether it's managing rules. The other thing that I didn't touch on is that all of the evaluations, so for any of the custom rules that we write, all the evaluations are all part of the reporting. So, and this is just another benefit of being able to do it. If you're not, being able to not have to do your reporting with a bunch of exceptions as to why that specific grouping of S3 buckets, for example, are public. We have a rule that has a list of the buckets that we are allowing to be public. So we're actually going to be, we have a set model of what's compliant and non-compliant based on the rule that we have, and we have the evidence, obviously, to prove it. So I'll stop there. Any additional questions, Drew, that I can answer?
None right now. Anybody thinking about a question to ask? Well, go ahead and get that into chat right now while we have a chance.
And while we're waiting, I just want to highlight like these, we just evaluated all those customs rules that we just added. So one of the things we always talk about, and I know Drew's going to talk about in the end, is literally 15 minutes. So from when you get set up, and I could do this evaluation for any of the compliance frameworks, but once you essentially connect to Fugue, whether it's your custom rules or otherwise, get your evaluations. This is looking at all of these different EBS volumes that are not encrypted. Other rule to block public access, we check all those buckets, and if it's not under, not part of that exception list, then it's going to flag as non-compliant. So just a really quick time to value when we're doing these sorts of things, and that's what we displayed here. So if there are no other questions, Drew, I don't know if you had the other slide that you wanted to pop up there.
Yeah, thank you, Ricardo. One thing I wanted to throw out there too, when we talk about being developer first and empowering developers to take control of the security of their cloud environments, sometimes I think we may tend to overly focus on infrastructure as code security, which is critically important to get right before you deploy. But it's also pretty rare, I think, in weigh in with your experiences, Ricardo, what you've seen. It's pretty rare to find a cloud environment that was 100% deployed and managed using infrastructure as code. It's usually kind of a mix of stuff that was created and deployed using Cloud Console. Maybe you've got some infrastructure as code in there as well, or none, and you're hoping to use infrastructure as code. And kind of wanted to emphasize too that the ability of Fugue to evaluate a running cloud environment on AWS, Azure, or Google Cloud can be enormously helpful for developers. Maybe they need to check their dev environment, what they're kind of building and aiming to deploy to catch things early, pre-production, if you will, or check a staging environment, being able to fix things before a security team comes in to review or audit what they're doing. All of those things can be incredibly helpful for developers, in addition to the infrastructure as code security capabilities that Fugue brings. So just kind of wanted to throw that out there. I don't know, Ricardo, if you have any.
Yeah, I would definitely add to that. I mean, I think you're 100% right. Just because of many customers, enterprises are now starting to adopt the use of Terraform and to require that. I think you still have factions within organizations that will do things, in a manner that they're comfortable. And a lot of times it's just kind of doing it, in a quick way. It's easy to hop into the console and to modify a configuration because it's just easy. But obviously the state file is not going to represent that. And so you would need some form of check, and that's what the runtime checks are going to be there for. The other side of that is, knowing, you can deploy a workload via Terraform and even running plan, but you don't know that that workload is going into a compliant VPC, for example. So those sorts of things are important to be able to have those runtime checks to make sure that you're checking things on an ongoing basis. And then the nice thing, we talk about shifting left, is discovering vulnerabilities. I'm not discovering vulnerabilities isn't necessarily a nice thing, but being able to write a rule that checks for something that you want to avoid that may not be on security's list of checks, or may not be part of a specific compliance framework, but you as an individual know it's a vulnerability, and you can write a rule for that and then extend that rule check into the infrastructure as code and extend it into the pipeline. So that's really a nice benefit, and being able to do that is something that we are seeing. Pretty much all of our customers are going and doing that, and that's really a really strong use case for custom rules.
Yeah, awesome. Thank you, Ricardo. So we'll go ahead and wrap up here. Fugue we have a free trial. And it takes about 15 minutes to get up and running. Point Fugue at your AWS, Azure, Google Cloud environment, and get a complete cloud compliance assessment, the interactive cloud infrastructure map that you saw Ricardo show, detailed remediation guidance for all your violations. The visualization can be extremely helpful for you to understand what you have running and your security posture. And we will help you bring your cloud into compliance in 8 weeks. So go ahead and if you want to kick up a free trial, do that. If you want to set up a one-on-one session with Ricardo or one of our solutions engineers to kind of dig a little bit deeper into your specific use case and how Fugue can help, reach out to us as well. Happy to set that up. And we've got a whole bunch of resources available to you. The Engineer's Handbook on Cloud Security, the Masterclass series. Encourage everybody to check those out. We think they're awesome. We think you'll think they're awesome too. And with that, I would like to go ahead and wrap. Thank you, Ricardo. Thank you, Sivia. And thanks everybody for joining. Appreciate your time, and we will see you next time.
Thanks, Drew. Take care.
Cheers.